Heading
Sweet.
over to the court battle. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so yeah, just an idea. So we this week's parashut is double parasha. I don't know if it's the same in South Africa of Tazria Metzora, which discusses impurity, spiritual and physical impurity. Um, and one of the things which is very interesting that it discusses is when people speak lashon hara or negative gossip about other people. What happened in biblical times, or at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, they received sarat, which was a skin condition, which had to be viewed by the Kohen, and he had to give the all clear. But before he did that, the person that was guilty of this offense, so to speak, had to go into isolation, going to like literally, we can relate to it with what happened with COVID 5 years ago. So they had to go into isolation for 7 days, and then the Kohen checked it. So the reason for that is, I mean, I'm just checking my notes here. Um, Negative speech causes negativity and negative energy, and it could even lead to and even toxicity, as I think we can all attest to that if we've been with someone who just talks negatively and it can divide relationships and damage relationships. So the reason why he or she is in isolation is to self-reflect and hopefully uh, do to Shiva and won't be do it again. Will be circumspect or will think before they speak. I know easier said than done, but that's the main reason behind it.
We had a share Sunday morning with Rabbi Albach, uh, specifically about Lashon Hora. And I remember one of the things he said was like it's three sins in one. It's murder, adultery, and what's the other one? I can't remember now. But it's interesting to me. It's like one of the worst things you can do, and it's one of the easiest things you can do.
All right. So before we all go to hell, let's give over the share. All right.
It's fine, mate.
All right, guys. Let's cover some ground because we in terms of the Gemara is going to bring up a very specific issue. We've done the Mishnah. We don't have to do it again. So what you missed the other day, Brendan, is there was this commentary that, according to Rava, he said that Adim Zomimim, if they all testify as a single group, one of the ways to make sure they're a single group is that they need to testify within a brief statement, and that statement is um, almost an acknowledgement of peace upon you, my teacher, my master. That was actually in Bava Kama. We learned that as a group in 73b. According to some authorities, it's just the first three words, which is peace upon you, my teacher, not the master part. But in any event, it's a very, very short period of time. And we said, well, how can that be? Because if you have two people of a second set of witnesses testifying against 100 witnesses of a single set, you're never going to get 100 people testifying within the space of a few words. So what the actual reaction was, according to Rav Acha of Difti, who asked the question to Ravina, he said, like, how's that possible? And Ravina said to Rav Acha, look, it doesn't mean that all have to say it at the same time. It means that each one followed within the brief period of time that statement of his colleague, meaning there can't be a break. So the minute you've got witness number 7, as he finishes his sentence, within a second, the other one gives his testimony. So what's the advantage of linking a single group is that if one of the witnesses are invalidated, then the entire group is not given the reciprocal penalty they wish to do to the defendant. Also, one of the other factors is if the groups are separated, they're separated in terms of vantage points. If they're witnesses against the defendant and one's in the west wing and one's in the east wing of your various sets and they don't see each other, held as separate testimonies. I don't know how that would go with regards to if they uttered their testimonies within group 1 and 2, are they seen as a single group? Now, the reality is, according to obviously most opinions, is that if the groups didn't see each other, they are seen as separate groups. But you would want a reason to invalidate the witness. But how this came about is we studied Rabbi Akiva, Rav Yossi, and we studied the Mishnah of Rebbe, who was Rav Yehuda Hanassi, and Rabbi Shimon. So now that we've got all those points put up, we want to discuss a different case in the Gemara. Well, it's the same Mishnah. So Rav Papa says to a buyer that, look, there's a particular statement about Rabbi Akiva that he said in the Mishnah. Does everybody know what Rabbi Akiva said, guys, or do you want me to reiterate it? Guys?
I say reiterate.
Okay.
He's about what he said about the third witness.
Okay, so tell us.
So he said that I'm so tired, but I'll give it a shot. He said that I can't say it properly, but I just know that he was different to the other guy about the third witness. He said that the third witness is he's more responsible, he's more liable. That's what he was going at.
Excellent. Excellent. So what Gavin says is correct. It's not that he's more liable, but we don't deal more leniently with him. So Gavin's 100% correct.
It's the same level of liability, but I
He's
think he
the
did say
same
it's more
level of
stringent.
liability. I know that's
But
what
he
you
said-
meant.
Yeah, but I think didn't he say more stringent?
No, he said the third witness is not mentioned so that we should deal more leniently, but rather that we deal more stringently with him, because you would have thought by logic
So you got
that
to
his
use the two as
sentence.
yeah.
His sentence is not the same as theirs, since on the testimony of the strength of the remaining two witnesses, that alone could convict the defendant. And therefore, why should the third witness, by logic, be given as stringent a penalty as the first two? Because you don't need his testimony to add to the conviction of the defendant. You already have two witnesses. So we say, on that basis, you would think that we deal more leniently with the third person on logic. But he said the whole reason why it uses this plurality of the word witnesses, by the testimony of two witnesses and by the testimony of three witnesses, it's not superfluous. It's meant there to establish the fact that whether they're two or three, the minute he joins the group, just like if a person joins a group for a mitzvah, he gets part of the mitzvah, so too if he joins a group of evil people, he gets the punishment as a group. Exactly as Gavin said. Gavin, I'm impressed, but that was well done.
Oh, thanks, but it's not that brilliant. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, well, I didn't see anybody else coming forward. I'll give you that much. So it says exactly like that. And if this is how the Chumash punishes one who was merely an accomplice to transgressors, treating him like the transgressors themselves, how much more so will he be rewarded of one who becomes an accomplice to those performing a mitzvah, like those who actually perform a mitzvah? Okay. Now, the one thing that is mentioned is just as two witnesses, if one of them was found to be a relative to one of the parties, there's bias, either for or against a family member, and therefore is disqualified to serve as a witness. Also because somebody chooses a profession like gambling, or because of the sins he committed. It was in Sanhedrin in the 24th and 27th daf. Their testimony is invalid since only one witness remains. So this is saying so too with three. So if one of them was found to be a relative or disqualified witnesses, and there are two qualified witnesses left to establish a testimony, their testimony was invalid. But this is not according to Rabbi Akiva. Does that make sense? The testimony of two qualified witnesses is disqualified by the invalidation of the third member of the group. So we're going to just look at this. But in the meantime, if we're focusing on Rabbi Akiva, let me just bring the issue of the Gemara up a second. So it says, look, based on the fact that the third is not mentioned, as is with 2, the discussion focuses on the latter part of that quote, and the ruling that disqualification of one member of a set of witnesses invalidates the testimony of all of them. Okay, so I'm just going to share the Mishnah because I think you guys need to read it and you'll see where we're coming from here. Okay. So, Gav, if you have a look here, just quickly, we state that whether there are 2 or 3 witnesses, it's not like 3 witnesses outweigh the testimony of 2, because it would make common sense that 3 witnesses should have more credibility than 2. We're saying no, it's based on the quality of the evidence. And we say it's true because even if, in the case of Adam Zimmerman, there is a second set that said the first set, even if there are 100 of them, were with them somewhere else at the time that they viewed the apparent crime, then we believe the latter 2 as a special rule from Moshe at Har Sinai. So we're saying that either 2 or 3, etc., was there such a novelty? Because if you look at Rabbi Shimon, is that apart from understanding that 2 is equal to 100, and it's more about when they testified against the first set, as opposed to how many witnesses, that's when we go to Gavin's statement of Rabbi Akiva, that he deals with the third witness just as stringently as the other 2. And you would think not just as stringently because you don't even need his testimony. But the Gemara goes on to say that that's providing, Gavin, and this is a big rule, that that third witness is not invalidated. So if that third witness is disqualified, the other 2 witnesses, their testimony is also disqualified. Does that make sense?
Yeah, clear.
Yeah, okay. So guys, what we are saying is here is that how can they be disqualified? Either there's a bias because they're relative, or they are habitual sinners, or their career is something dubious that might make them biased, such as being a professional gambler. So that's why it mentions this plurality, and this is where the Gemara is actually asking its question. It says, the discussion which follows the latter part of the quote, the ruling that disqualification of one member of a set of witnesses invalidates the testimony of all of them. So that's what the Gemara is going to ask a question on. And Rav Papa says to Abaya, if so, let the presence of a murdered man save the murderer by invalidating the testimony of the others. Since the victim was a witness to his own murder and is disqualified to testify about this, even if it was physically possible, he should invalidate the testimony of all the other witnesses. Okay, so what are we saying? Is, guys, the murdered man is an invalid witness for 2 reasons. He is an enemy of the accused and he's a principal in the case. Now, just before we continue, this did bug me when I learned the Gemara. Does it bug you in any way? It should bug you.
And he's also related to himself.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's also like another issue, isn't it?
Yeah, that is a certain issue, but what bugs you about this? Should bug you.
Yeah, what if he's an enemy of the accused, he's invalidated, but it gives him more reason for him to be a suspect.
No, we're talking about the man that's been murdered. That's what should bug you. This is exactly what should bug you. So Rav Papa said, let the murdered man, not the man that commits the murder, the victim, let the murdered man invalidate the testimony of the others. Since he was a victim, he was also a witness to his own murder and disqualified to testify about it. Now, your question should be, what are you talking about? He's dead. That's the first question I had on this. Is it not true?
Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Guys, do you get what my question is?
Do
Kevin?
they
He's
have
going to
like a
come
way
back from
to
the dead
communicate with
and
them?
accuse himself.
No. We're saying the murdered, not the
The
murderer.
murdered guy must come back from the dead to accuse him.
Yeah, so that's not possible. That's obviously not possible. So what would we say? There's a case of perhaps a few things. Number one, even if he happened to have called out before he was actually stabbed mortally or mortally wounded, he's one witness. He can't testify on his own against the other party, being a single witness for a capital case. That's number one. Number two, even if they did bring him back from the dead, he's a protagonist in this case, and therefore he might be a witness, but he's also a principal in the case itself. That's Tosfot's argument. But even according to Tosfot, it's a bit more complicated like that. Why is it more complicated? Because if you want to say that you cannot be a witness and related to the principal of the case, meaning either the defendant or the plaintiff, your problem is that you might have a witness that is related to either the murderer or the murdered. Do you get what I'm saying? And therefore it would preclude their testimony. So what happens in that case, according to Tosfot, is he said if you would have a very, very difficult problem. What would your problem be? Is that somebody could be murdered at a family braai, and because the whole family knew the victim and knew the murderer and they're related, if they're disqualified on that particular basis, then a murderer would always get off. If it's based on being a relative to the murderer or the murdered, because there's a relationship bias. So that's your first issue. The other one is that it's very difficult to come back to against the dead and testify. But what Rav Papa is doing here is he's actually discussing a principle. And this is what I had to actually work my way around. He was saying, listen, the minute somebody steals from you or the minute somebody kills you, then you are technically the enemy. Would you agree? They're not your mate. Would you agree with that?
No.
So according to Rav Papa, who says to a buyer, is that the two reasons for invalidation is he's a principal in that case and he's an enemy of the accused. And since the victim was a witness to his own murder, and even if he was somehow brought back from the dead, as Lance would suggest, he's disqualified to testify about this. Why? Because he should invalidate the testimony of all the other witnesses and make it impossible to try the murderer. So what's the bottom line here? Is Rav Papa's question is obviously not intended to prove that murderers can't be tried, because the Torah states otherwise. Rather, his argument is that it's a rule asserted by the Tana of the Mishnah, and it can't be true since it would lead to the impossible conclusion that murderers can never be convicted. On what basis? If you want to say, and this is where the theory comes from, if you want to say specifically the argument is directed at Rav Yossi's view, that a disqualified witness becomes part of a group even if he doesn't participate in the warning in a capital case. And therefore, what's the case is that if he's invalidated because of a relationship, that's when the problem comes about, just by merely being there. But according to Rav Yehuda Nossi, he has to be a participating witness, either in the warning procedure or being prepared to testify against the accused. So what we are saying is, Kevin, here very, very simply, is that Rav Papa's question to Abai is, look, the minute you disqualify one of the witnesses, and this is directed at Rav Yossi, by mere view of the fact that they're there, you're going to disqualify all the other witnesses. So this is this big problem that I've got with you, that there's no criteria for bias if you're just discrediting a witness. Okay? Meaning because no murderer would ever be convicted. Again, before a guy dies, he's one of the witnesses. And therefore, because he is an enemy of the person that's going to kill him, because at that point the person is your enemy. If they're going to steal or kill you, then an enemy is not allowed to testify against his enemy, and therefore he's disqualified as a witness. The minute he's disqualified, it invalidates every other witness, so somebody would always get off for murder. Okay? He actually puts it one stage further, by the way, not at this point in the Gemara. He says, well, actually, the murderer himself is a witness to the murder he committed. That's much more of a difficult question, not the murdered. We're going to understand why it shifts. So, just in principle, if the murderer witnesses him committing a murder, he's invalidated as a witness. On what basis, guys? You can't self-incriminate.
Yeah.
You can't self-incriminate. So the murderer can't, by confession, say that he is a murderer and therefore incriminate himself. And therefore, since he cannot testify against himself, he is disqualified as a witness, which means if it disqualifies the whole group of witnesses, because he, in fact, witnessed his murdering of somebody else, on that basis of his disqualification, then the entire group of witnesses are disqualified. His argument, Rav Papa's argument to Abaya on Rav Yossi is then no murderer would ever be convicted. Do you get
But
that?
there's a problem now, Damon. I do see a problem. The problem is that the sorry, it took me a while to hear what you were saying. I'm just back into that. The problem that there is a way out of it, because what happens is that that person that died, he never gave himself a warning, so he's actually not a valid witness.
Yes, but that's only if you're holding exactly. That's only if you're holding by Rebbe, which is Rav Yehuda Hanossi. Rav Papa doesn't have a problem with Rav Yehuda Hanossi. He's got a problem with Rav Yossi, because Rav Yossi doesn't select any criteria of participation. In other words, calling out a warning, nor saying that his intention is to testify. Because in a monetary case, that's the exact point, is that you can't issue a warning. It's only in a capital case. So you have to then, the court asks you, are you intending to just be merely a spectator, or do you agree that you're going to be a participant in the trial as a valid witness? And therefore his problem, exactly as Gavin said, isn't with Rebbe, Rav Yehuda Nasi. His problem is with Rav Yossi. You're right, Gavin.
So what does Rav Yossi say? Does Rav Yossi say that you can be a witness without having to give any without issuing a warning?
So that's exactly it. When this concept was drafted up.
Even for a capital case, did he say that? Sorry, I must have missed that when you said that.
No. So I think it's a good question. So Rav Yossi said regarding what is the said, that even if one or even three witnesses or more are disqualified, the testimony of the entire group is invalidated. And then regarding capital cases, he agrees. But in regard to monetary cases, he said the disqualification of one witness does not invalidate the testimony of the rest of the witnesses, because we're much more careful in a capital case not to kill somebody. So if one witness is invalidated, all of them are invalidated. But in a monetary case, if there are credible witnesses left over, say there are three, and the first one is invalidated, we look to the remaining witnesses who have not been disqualified to speak up in this court case. And
but his opinion on monetary makes no difference here, because this is the guy's dead. This is obviously a capital case.
Yes, but it does make a difference, because even in a capital case, he doesn't discern that there has to be a criteria to testify. Merely being there suffice.
That's what I was asking you. Okay, so that's the answer I wanted. Sorry, thanks.
Yeah.
No, you gave extra. I'm just saying, that's what I was trying to get at. So just merely being there is fine. That's what I was asking.
Yeah,
you probably explained it over the course of time. I just didn't ever hear you say that. I must have missed that. I don't always have good days.
No, it's no problem. So I mean, I can share the Mishnah while explaining to the guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I don't know if they got. So I'm going to just share the Mishnah, and then I'll just discuss it while you're reading it. Guys, give me a sec. So according to Rav Yossi, we understand in a capital case you have to be more stringent. So if one of the witnesses is disqualified, we disqualify the entire group, so that the murderer is off the hook. At this point, he's not even talking about Eidim Zomamim. He's talking about Stama murder. And Rebbe says, listen, whether it's a monetary or capital case, and he says it's fine. In a monetary case, we keep the remaining witnesses. They haven't been disqualified. They're enough to testify. But Rebbe said, basically, it doesn't matter if it's a monetary or capital case. The disqualification of a single witness invalidates the testimony of the entire group. But under what circumstances? Only if the witnesses warned them immediately before the crime. So if we take our question away from a monetary case, with a capital case, it allows for a problem, any capital case. The one is that if one that is merely there ends up witnessing it and he's invalidated because either he's a protagonist in the case or he's an enemy or for any other reason, then a murderer would never ever be convicted. Why? Because he witnesses himself murdering somewhere else. So how this Gemara goes is very simple. It says, look, it would be impossible to try the murderer if the victim was somehow able to testify because he was a witness and an enemy of the murderer because he was a victim as well as a protagonist in the case. He would be invalidated as a witness because he's biased, and therefore his invalidation would disqualify the whole group of witnesses, and a murderer would never be tried. So Abaye gives an amazing answer to Rav Papa, and he said, okay, I get that with regards to somebody that's been murdered. But let's just say the victim is killed from behind. Then the victim himself didn't witness his own murder. He was surprised. And therefore, it doesn't invalidate the testimony of the witnesses to the murder. So Abaye says to Rav Papa, listen, that's not a valid answer because a victim can be killed without knowing it. And therefore, that's not a blanket case that not every murderer would ever get off. Most would get off, but some wouldn't. And Rav Papa asks again, he said, look, then let's take a different case. Let the presence of a sodomized man save the sodomizer. So, and Abaye, again, before we get to that argument, I need to discern something with you guys. And let me just tell you what I want to discern. There's sodomy it's an abomination that's punishable by the death penalty. So if a person was raped, their rapist, their sodomizer, would get the death penalty if he was not a willing participant. But if the passive partner basically didn't have any issue with it, he would be what? Put to death along with the actual active sodomizing partner. So in that particular case, that's where you have an issue. Why? Because if you have a look at it, there's a concept called Ein Adam Meisem Atzmo Rasha. A person can't incriminate themselves in Jewish law, particularly in capital cases, or even lashes, or even Makkos. So if a person is a willing participant in a prohibited sexual act, he can't testify against himself. You can't self-incriminate. And since therefore he's an invalid witness to his own prosecution, because he can't incriminate himself, therefore his words can't be used to convict another. Do you get that? That's why it's gone from murder to sodomy, because the victim is never a participant. In the case of a sodomizer, sometimes somebody can be raped against their will. Another case, they can be a willing participant, but the active sodomizer for sure goes to gets put to death. But the passive person, maybe he didn't resist because the guy had a knife to his throat, but then that's not a willing participant. But all we are saying is if it's a case of passivity, that he didn't object, then in that particular case, he couldn't then convict his active partner. Why? Because he would be convicting himself, number one, which you cannot do. And therefore, because you can't self-incriminate, he's invalidated as a witness, and therefore he can't serve as a witness because of that bias against the actual active partner. Further to which, one witness can't be used on its own, so he would need other witnesses. So in other words, his participation, if say one or two guys walked into a barn and the guys were having sexual relations, then because the person was an active participant in that particular case, and the actual sodomizer himself was a witness. In other words, they both witnessed it. They were committing sexual misconduct. They can't, therefore, they're witnesses to either being in their own crime as a passive or active partner, but the active partner, either the sodomizer or the passive partner that's willing, cannot self-incriminate. So once they invalidated as a witness, if they, as one of the witnesses, then the other people that walk in on them, they're all invalidated. Can you see this with any sexual crime, even adultery? Guys, do you understand the principle?
Mm.
Are you
Lars,
saying
give it over to me or Kevin, both of you.
you want to go first, Lance? Should I try give it a bash?
You can
Okay.
try.
Use the bash when it comes
Damon,
to
so
something.
if you're saying in your example, if there's a homosexual act being committed by two men and someone walks in on it, he is he's not an active participant, but he's party to the act, and he can't be
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is as follows. If
I'm
you
just a bit
walk
tight
in,
today. I'm very
if
tight
you
today.
walk
So this,
into, it doesn't have to even be sodomy. If you walk into a prohibited sexual act, even of adultery, the man and the woman are seeing each other, and therefore, if they are active participants, they're also witnessing their participation in a forbidden act. Therefore, their sins, making them a sinner, disqualifies you from being an active witness. And if one witness is disqualified and it invalidates all the others, nobody would ever be convicted on any capital case.
is there three witnesses in that
Damon,
case?
they're both guilty, so they aren't witnesses. Only the guy who walks in is a witness. They're
No,
both
it's
guilty.
not what the Gemara is
They're
saying.
both liable for a death sentence.
I get that. Just let me explain what Rav Papa is saying, what the nuance is. He is saying that in order to have a capital case, okay, it has to be specifically that the witness is giving a warning, because somebody that's in an intimate forbidden relationship or about to be murdered, or a murderer himself, is not going to warn himself. He's not going to run around with a knife saying, I know this is a death penalty case and I'm aware and I agree, and then while he's stabbing somebody else. So what Rav Papa's issue is with Rav Yossi is he's saying that Rav Yossi never specified in a capital case that there's any criteria for being an active witness, such as warning or testification. So the thing of it is that all of a sudden there's more than one person witnessing the crime. Even the criminal himself that's committing the act is a witness to what he's doing. And therefore, if he's a witness because you're not establishing any criteria for a witness, and he's discredited for being a witness because not only is he the protagonist, but he is a witness, but he's also a sinner. In that particular case, if it invalidates all the other witnesses, he is himself a witness. But if that's a criteria and then all of the witnesses are invalidated, you've got a problem. He is a witness, Lance. He happens to
That's
commit the crime.
insane. That's absolutely insane. The two are both guilty. How can he possibly be a reliable witness? He's guilty.
Yeah, but you're not.
That means that you can't have a law. That means you can't have a law that puts them to death, because it's physically impossible to. If they're automatically going to put each other off the hook, it's physically impossible to convict them.
And Rav Papa is saying that it's insane. Rav Yossi's statement is insane. He's agreeing with you. His statement isn't insane. He says there's a flaw with Rav Yossi's argument, because the problem with Rav Yossi's argument is that even perpetrators and victims are the witness to the crime themselves. And therefore, if you have no criteria for what makes a witness and you're just invalidating them based on discreditation of being a sinner, then in fact the murderer or the sodomizer themselves has witnessed what they've done, and therefore their discreditation by the virtue of the fact that they're a sinner is a problem, because that they are a witness to their own event. And therefore he's saying he far prefers, Rav Yehuda Nasi says that in order to be a witness in a capital case, you have to actually give a warning, because he's really unhappy with this case that that anybody that was there could now be picked off for being an invalid witness based on their track record, and now murderers are going to get off left, right, and center. And he says, if exactly as Lance says, if you push this to the extreme, even the murderer himself is in fact a witness to his crime, but because he's a sinner, he discredits all the other witnesses.